everybody. Welcome to Aggressive Progressives. Oh, yeah. So I'm here with Steve-O, Malcolm Fleischner, or do you say Fleischner? And I'm here with the miserable liberal, Steph Zamorano. Hi, everybody.
We have a full cast today. This is great.
Busy. Full cast. We got a lot happening on today's show. We're going to talk about the Bernie Sanders town hall that happened last night. We're going to talk about a new tariff that's being put on solar panels imported into the United States by Trump. He's doing a tariff. Now, I used to be for tariffs. Let's see if I'm for this one. We'll see. The answer just may surprise you, or will it? But first, what else are we going to talk about? Oh, and how the real challenge for progressives is running against Republicans in this off-year election is not really the Republicans, but the DCCC. Okay, because you know their problem. They like corporatists. So we're going to talk about all that stuff. But first, I want to start off by reminding people where we're at. We're in the middle of an unbelievable Red Scare. McCarthyism is a knee jerk to anybody who criticizes the establishment narrative on Russia or the war or anything. And let's remember, this all started. This started in 2014, I would say, maybe even earlier than that. With the Ukraine problems and the annexation of Crimea. But it really got ramped up after the Hillary Clinton lost to a orange clown who is a game show host. And they couldn't take that, so they invented, well, let's listen to what Barack Obama said. Because if you remember, before the 2016 election, Trump was saying that he wasn't gonna accept the results of the election because he thought too many illegals were gonna be voting. And so people were afraid that he wouldn't accept the outcome of the election. And this is what Barack Obama had to say to it then.
But the larger point that I want to emphasize here is that there is no serious person out there who would suggest somehow that you could even rig America's elections, in part because they're so decentralized and the numbers of votes involved. There's no evidence that that has happened in the past, or that there are instances in which that will happen this time. And so I'd advise Mr. Trump to stop whining and go try to make his case to get votes.
Okay, so that was what they said before the election. Then Donald Trump won, and now it's Russia, 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 Russia. Somebody hacked our election. And so now the United States, the people in the United States are being groomed for war. Right now, we're in the middle of another Cold War, which leads me to my first guest for today. I'm very excited to have. He recently wrote at The Nation, Democrats are repudiating, can you go to my computer? Democrats are repudiating FDR's precedent of détente with Russia by criminalizing alleged contacts with the Kremlin and by demonizing Russia itself. Today's Democrats are becoming the party of the new and more perilous Cold War. That is written by our first guest, Stephen Cohen, who was recently profiled by the Chronicle of Higher Education for his 4+ decades as a leading voice on Russian affairs, influencing world events along the way. Cohen's ideas about Russia, which once got him invited to Camp David to advise a sitting president, now make him the most controversial expert in the field, reports the Chronicle. He's a professor emeritus at Russian Studies at NYU and Princeton, whose work appears in The Nation, where he is a contributing editor. Please welcome Stephen F. Cohen. Hi, Stephen. Thanks for coming on.
Well, I'm happy to be with you because my young friends tell me you're the place to be.
Yes.
In addition to you being in California, but you having mentioned the new McCarthyites, a lot of them liberals, you need to assure me that you're not a Kremlin-linked broadcast and you're not going to ensnare me into uttering any Russian disinformation.
You know, that's exactly what I would think a Kremlin puppet would say when they came on my show. That's exactly the thing that they would say. Now, we're kidding around here, but it's not really a joke.
Actually, I'm not much joking because there is underway, both on the part of our government, in our Congress, and in all sorts of media projects, programs to, quote, rid the American media space of Russian disinformation. Now, I've been lecturing about Russia for 40 years. I've been going to Russia for as long. I have tons of Russian contacts, far more than Donald Trump. So I might have picked up some Russian disinformation on the way. I don't know what it means. Well, apparently it means anything that's not the orthodox consensus about the mess we're in.
So you said that the still unproven Russiagate allegations, promoted primarily by the Democratic Party, have become the #1 threat to American national security. Could you tell us how can you expand on that?
Well, it's utterly polluted our discourse about American-Russian relations because according to this narrative, the man who sits in the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin, ordered an attack on America during the 2016 presidential elections. Some leading Democrats equate that alleged attack with Pearl Harbor and 9/11. So how could we do anything to cooperate, as Trump once said he wanted to do, with such a criminal in the criminal in the Kremlin? Remember that ever since the Cold War, the first Cold War began, and certainly since Eisenhower, cooperating with the Kremlin about existential issues kept us from nuclear war. Today, they say that's really would be a criminal act. Imagine, I mean, I don't know your age or the age of your followers, but imagine John F. Kennedy in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's as close as we ever came to intentional nuclear war with Soviet Russia. He was free because the country trusted him to negotiate a non-war solution. It took a long time. It was a razor's edge kind of existential moment, but he did it. He did it because the country, the political class, the media trusted him. Trump, on the other hand, is said to be Putin's puppet, Putin's agent, a Manchurian candidate. So if we got into such an existential nuclear moment, could Trump negotiate us away from nuclear war? I think about that almost every day.
So that's exactly what scares me, right? I just saw an article in the Daily Beast that was reported by lefty news organizations that was doing exactly what you said. There was an advisor in the Trump campaign who recommended détente. Hey, why don't we pull back some of our forces along the Russian border, and maybe let's see if Putin responds in kind, and let's have friendlier relations with a nuclear country. And the Daily Beast wrote, by the way, they didn't do that. They ramped up. Trump went along with the military-industrial complex and the deep state, and he did their bidding. And they still wrote that story about this was the Trump administration's first try to pay back Putin for his investment in our election. Now that's what's happening on lefty news sites. So that's what's frightening to me. How much worse is it now than the first Cold War?
Well, I mean, I lived through a good deal of the first Cold War, which began more or less in 1948 and was said to have ended when President Reagan and then Soviet leader Gorbachev, and to a certain extent the first President Bush, announced that the Cold War was over. Now, the Council on Foreign Relations, which is as close to a stenograph of Washington that you can get, has just announced we're in a second Cold War. I've been saying that for 15 years, and they said I was wrong, but now they've said so. I think this new Cold War is much more dangerous. Stop and think for a minute. The epicenter, the political center of the first Cold War was in Berlin, not anywhere near the Soviet Union or Russia. Today, the fronts of the new Cold War are along Russia's actual borders, from the Baltic Sea, the small Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and Poland, all the way down to Ukraine. So this Cold War with military buildups is unfolding on Russia's borders. The chances for accidental hot war are just enormously more than they were before. Secondly, and this is very important, we have so demonized Putin, unreasonably, I am sure, that it is not even a legitimate idea, as Trump has found out, to propose, quote, cooperating with Russia. You remember Trump ran on that pledge that he would cooperate with Russia. He meant be a détente president, as Eisenhower, Nixon, and Reagan were. They have not permitted him, or he's changed his mind. But it's also important to know that all during my adult lifetime, and participation in public affairs, which began when I was a Princeton professor in the 1970s. There was always a very powerful anti-Cold War, pro-Dayton, as we called it then, organized forces in mainstream America. I mean, in Congress, in the State Department, even among aides to the sitting president, and certainly in the media. So those of us who wanted to tamp down the Cold War, wanted to cooperate with Soviet Russia, had an arena, a public arena in the mainstream. That no longer exists. There's a complete lockout, a complete shutdown in the mainstream media on our point of view, which means we can't have that discussion here as the danger grows.
And that's the thing that's scary. So why don't you tell people about your last appearance on CNN?
It was so long ago. Which one do you have in mind?
So they brought you on to talk about Ukraine?
Well, my relationship with CNN was kind of episodic. For a long time, they didn't need me, I didn't care, and Russia was not in the headlines. When the Ukrainian crisis began in 2014, suddenly I got a lot of calls, and I was on many broadcasts. From Fareed Zakaria on Sunday morning to the evening broadcast. One morning, I forget his exact name, Smirkonis. I wasn't sure exactly who he was, but I went on early in the morning. I'm not a morning person. I don't think I'd even been to bed yet. I went on, and apparently what I said so startled him. He'd never heard it before, which basically was little more that we're in a new Cold War and both sides, not just Russia, are responsible, that he looked so stunned that those 6 minutes went viral and they still move around on the internet. I think the last time I was invited to be on CNN was probably somewhere a year and a half or 2 years ago. I haven't heard from him since, after that flurry of appearances. But obviously, the same is true of MSNBC. None of us, because there's a group of us, can get on those programs. We can't get in the New York Times op-ed page, the Washington Post. It's a complete blackout. When's the last time you heard in mainstream media or read my argument, and it's not just my argument, that this new Cold War began several years ago, and the United States played a driving role in instigating it. It wasn't just Russia and Putin. And therefore, we need, and have needed for a long time, a major change in American policy. When is the last time you heard that point of view anywhere other than outside the mainstream?
Well, that's why we're hearing it here. That's why. So people tune into Rachel Maddow and Chris Hayes. I'm not kidding, and they really think they're getting the news from a left perspective. And they're not.
Yeah.
They're getting the news from a corporatist who is pushing a narrative that is completely baseless and factless. They're pushing McCarthy smears left and right. They're doing it to environmentalists. And I try to tell people on the left who do that thing, and even in independent media, in new media, they push the Russian negate thing. And I try to remind them that this is used to silence the left, you dummies. And if you push it, you're going to soon be hoisted on your own petard. The moment you oppose war, they're going to paint you as a red, because that's how this works. Am I right?
You know, I don't know. The explanations of what's driving this, let's call it this Russiagate mania. Remember, it began long before Trump's actual election.
Right.
We still don't know. I guess all of your followers know about this so-called dossier, this anti-Trump dossier, which is preposterous beyond extreme. I mean, it's got him pissing on prostitutes in a luxury hotel and colluding with the Russians to steal the election, and all manner of pulp fiction nonsense. But it's taken with great seriousness. It's been used by our intelligence agencies. The actual origins of that document and where that, quote, information came from, I think have yet to been revealed. I don't think it was the FBI that began it. I think it came from elsewhere. But the point of it is, as you say, media and media representatives and political representatives of not only the liberal left, but the so-called progressive left have embraced this narrative. I have heard it said by some representatives in Congress that they think this will help them get the House back in 2018. All right, that's one motive. The corporate motive, I don't know. American corporations are fractious, have different motives. I mean, for example, This Cold War may be good for the military-industrial complex financially. Well, it is good, right? We know that. But it's not good for the 140 or 50 American retail companies that have been in Russia and doing very good business for decades. Procter & Gamble, for example, Starbucks, all the hamburger joints. I mean, they're all over Russia, and they don't like this. I mean, the Russians are starting to boycott American products. So, and going back to Russian products. So this is not good for their business. I'm in a funny position. My beloved wife, with whom I've been for more than 30 years, is the editor and publisher of The Nation magazine, which is nominally, I guess, the leading publication of the left progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And the kind of nonsense that you just iterated is widespread among the nation, in the nation community. And they have taken to disliking me very much. They say I'm undermining the resistance, that I'm wrecking everything against Trump, that I'm preventing his impeachment by saying that his Russia policy, cooperate, would be a good thing. This has made things very difficult for my wife, who, you know, as they say now, mans it through bravely, gives them space in the nation as well as me. But this has infected the so-called liberal progressive community like a cancer.
How do you see this rolling? How do you see this ending up? I see this ending up horribly. And how is it that they don't see this ending up horribly? How do you see it?
Well, I see two. Let me give you the worst scenarios, and they may not be the least improbable. And I'm not the sort of guy who, I'm a professor. I have not, during my career, gone around ringing alarm bells and living by worst scenarios. But there are worse scenarios. One is that this new Cold War with Russia, which is so much more dangerous than the preceding one, will escalate in a way that Trump, captive now to the Russiagate narrative, will be unable to avoid nuclear war. That's the worst scenario. And that may sound Dr. Strangelove to you, but these guys in Washington, and this began under Obama, by the way, have a program of so-called modernization of nuclear weapons that will, and I quote, make them more usable, more usable. Reagan's contribution to our survival was to come to believe that no nuclear war can be won and therefore must never be fought. And therefore, he became something he hadn't been before with Gorbachev in the late 80s, a man who wanted to end the arms race in the nuclear war. That is gone. That is gone. The other worst scenario is that these zealots actually take the House and manage to begin impeachment proceedings against Trump. That is their declared intention. They say it every day. I mean, it's not a mystery. Impeachment drags on. The institution of the presidency becomes badly wounded. And the next president of the United States, if he or she is a Democrat, is going to get the same treatment from the Republicans. So we will cripple, that's the worst scenario, cripple our political system, the only one we currently have, while tottering along a razor's edge of nuclear war with Russia. Those are the worst scenarios. Take your pick.
So it's horrible. I wanted to talk a little bit. Why is this Cold War worse than the last Cold War? Why is it more dangerous? Why are we in more peril?
Well, once again, I said before, because, I mean, you may not remember, I don't know your age, but the 36. Political, 36, when Gorbachev came to power, the guys in the 70s said he was criminally young. So you're criminally young. Call me back when you're older than 65, if we're all still around. I won't be, but look, think about it. Just get some images in your head. The 40-year-long Cold War had its political center in Berlin, in divided Berlin. And a lot of that Cold War was fought in proxy wars between American and Soviet militias or armies or civil wars in what we used to call the Third World, in Africa and Latin America, far away from Russia. This sucker is unfolding right on Russia's borders. Let me tell you, the new NATO buildup in the Baltic means that ordinary artillery, American NATO artillery, can hit St. Petersburg. the second Russian city. Not a missile, but artillery. And there's a civil war going on in Ukraine, and no matter which side you think is right, the Kiev government that we back or the rebels in Donbass, it is a civil war. Every bit as much as our civil war was a civil war. It is a civil war inside Slavic civilization, Russian-Ukrainian civilization. It divides family against family. But, Jimmy, and this is the key, it is a proxy war. The United States, Washington is backing Kiev, and Russia's backing Donbass. So imagine that war just getting escalated a bit. And then both superpowers, nuclear superpowers, decide they have to step in.
We
didn't have anything like that after the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. And by the way, the American ruling class, policy class, corporate, academic, intellectual, political, whatever you call them, learned a lesson from 1962. They learned a lesson. It was discussed. It was, we can never get this close to nuclear war again. And therefore, we need to take steps to buffer the Cold War against these type of crises. So they did things called détente. They had the hot phone. They had all sorts of cooperation. Since 2014, virtually all of those cooperative, protective relationships with Russia have been vaporized, mainly by these crazies in Washington. And so when Trump, and I'm going on too long, but this is how I got myself in trouble with our dear progressives. Trump said during the campaign, it would be great to cooperate with Russia. Those were his words. And everybody said, oh, he's Putin's puppet. I said, wherever I was allowed to say, it would be more than great. It is essential that we cooperate with Russia. For all the reasons, Jimmy, I just gave you.
I agree.
So what's happened is the loathing for Trump, and it's not only the Democrats. Let me point out to you that the Republicans in Congress are trying to defend Trump against the Russiagate allegations, correct? Most of them, a lot, right? However, none of them are saying it would be great to cooperate with Russia. In other words, they try to protect him from impeachment or from harming their reelection possibilities, but they're not in favor of cooperation. With Russia. He's the only one at the top of our political pyramid. And he is a very weak horse to ride.
Listen, is it possible, can you stay over? We have to take a break. I don't know, do you have to leave or can you stay for another short segment?
Nobody invites me anyplace. Where am I going to go?
Okay. All right. We're going to take. All right. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Now, this is the free part of the show. So if you want to see the rest of this show, which we got a lot of stuff coming up, go to tytnetwork.com/join, become a member. And if you're already a member, go to tytnetwork.com/members-live. You see the rest of this show right now. It's because of stories like this that you have to support independent media, because you're not going to hear professors like this on MSNBC or CNN. And when they do, they kick them off in about 15 seconds. So come on back. We'll be right back in 1 minute.